Welcome to Local Voices, a community podcast produced by the Echo newspaper, which takes a deep dive into the news that matters the most to you. I'm your host, Hayden Moore. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, I'm delighted to let you know that this episode is also available on YouTube. The best place to start is echo.ie/podcasts. So we're doing things a little bit differently this week. I'm hosting a virtual roundtable panel discussion with 3 local elected representatives from South Dublin County Council about 4 core issues: misinformation, crack cocaine, the rezoning of land at Newlands Farm in City West, and the Tala Wetlands. Now, it's time to introduce our guests. I would like to welcome independent councillor Mick Duff to the podcast. Thanks very much for joining us, Mick.
Very welcome, Hayden. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Sinn Féin councillor Louise Dunne, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Aidan.
And lastly, Deputy Mayor, South Dublin County Council, Fine Gael councillor David McManus. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Hayden. First time on the podcast, but great to be invited.
Great. I'm delighted to have you all on. I really am. And I know we have 4 key areas of discussion today, and I'm not going to wax lyrical or waste any time. Let's just jump straight into things here. So I suppose first we're talking about misinformation. And this is off the back of the anti-lockdown protest that was in Dublin. It'll be a couple of weekends ago now by the time the podcast is released, and it turned nasty. There were several arrests and multiple people charged with various public order offences, and some of the conspiracy theories that were fueling the large parts of these protesters was just bizarre. When I was reading them, I couldn't really get my head around some of the stuff, how it got that far. And I suppose misinformation is being spread by far right groups, and it is radicalising people through the internet. There's no denying that, and we've seen that in America, and it came right to our doorstep last weekend. I suppose I have a simple question that I just want to put to each of you, and I'll start with yourself, Councillor McManus. What can you do as a local elected representatives to help prevent the spread of misinformation among your constituents?
Well, starting at a personal level, if we look at our own social media, we should be mindful of who we're retweeting, the type of news articles we're sharing, making sure that information we put out is accurate. I think people nowadays, unfortunately, for good or for worse, they're buying less newspapers. They're getting more news from online. The type of journalism that's taken off, it's all about speed and getting stuff out there. So I think certainly if they want to follow local news, what's happening on South Dublin County Council, I can't say anything bad against the Echo newspaper, because there is a bit of quality to it, there is a bit of depth. I think all councillors will agree that they do follow what we do at a council level very closely. So I think that's a positive. But there is a whole generational change now. People seem to be addicted to their smartphones and retweeting everything that comes up. If it looks good or drives rage, that's what takes off. I think there's a bit of understanding there that's needed from all of us.
Okay. Move on to yourself, Councillor Dunne. What can you do as an elected rep to help curb the spread of misinformation?
I suppose as elected reps, we have an onus, to be, providing the public with accurate information as well. The right wing kind of extreme stuff and the conspiracy theories, has highlighted how bad it is. But I think what is happening underneath that, there's an underlying thing that's happening underneath that. And what it is that there's so many in the country that feel disengaged, who feel like they're being left behind, and are looking for, other alternatives to, what politicians are offering. So I think, we have a responsibility. I think there's a huge mistrust there with a lot of people within our communities. There's a lot of apathy there. I suppose there's a lot of miscommunication as well coming from, politicians as well. So, we have a responsibility, like David said, to be reporting accurately, to be giving clear communication, not to be drip feeding the public as well. Because if we talk about that protest, which I totally condone, there was a minority there. I watched a number of videos, and there was a minority there that were, involved in criminality, were involved in, violence, all of that kind of stuff. But there was people there, I'm assuming, that were there, just because of lockdowns, and they're looking for answers, they're looking for ways out of this. So I think, we have a responsibility as politicians to be making sure that we're giving clear and accurate information, and that we're not, giving drip feeding the public, and, just there's a discontent there. People are looking for a way out of this. People are suffering. So I hope that answers that for you.
No, it does. And Councillor Duff, what's your take on this?
The sad part about this, and I agree with my two colleagues there with their presentations on it, that nobody seems to be worried about factual verification. If something goes up, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, it doesn't matter how it's disseminated, it's taken immediately as being gospel truth because somebody has actually said this and they refer to some scientific research, or there's this person saying this, and it must be true. We met this through the repeal campaign. We met this through a variety of campaigns where misinformation was being sent out and it was being swallowed wholesale by a lot of people in the community. Sadly, as Louise has just said there, a lot of people go to these protests because they believe this. They don't want to believe it, but they are believing it, and they believe that their rights are being impinged upon. We have freedoms under the Constitution. The Constitution does not mention the pandemic in any way, shape, or form, and the Constitution is being abused left, right, and centre. It's being used to argue about COVID checkpoints. It's being used and abused not by people who are vulnerable. This is being used and abused by people, journalistic backgrounds, academic backgrounds, people who would know better. This crosses all spectres of society, and it's worrying that it is disseminated so quickly and swallowed so easily without anybody saying, hang on a minute, can I check this out? We'd have to do this. That's part of our role. We must do this as councillors. We're told something. We don't swallow everything we're told by officials, and my colleagues will tell you that we've more rows in the chamber about bits and pieces of information. You would argue back, but thank God there are people fighting back. There are parties putting out leaflets at the present moment. Parties of the far right putting out leaflets through doors at the present moment, and there's a good group here in Dublin South West, DSW Together, who are countering the information with good information, reassurance to people, and that will be going into people's homes shortly. And that's cross-party on the of sort of a gathering of the left, if you wish, that have to come back and have to respond to this and believe that it's the only way out is that if you physically can put something into somebody's hands that they can read, well, maybe they might take it on board.
I know, like, social media can be absolutely fantastic for the sake that it is such an open forum, but in a sense as well, then it is just like the Wild West. Like, people can say and do whatever they want, essentially. Councillor McManus, just to bring you in on this again, do you think that maybe when people join social media that there should be some sort of verification process where they have to provide a passport or some other form of ID? And on top of that as well, then, do you think that would even help stop spread the amount of misinformation?
I think trying to get people to verify their accounts and give ID, I think that's been more suggested as a means to reduce the abuse and the personalised attacks we sometimes get. It might be helpful, certainly. I think what we're seeing now is that there's an expectation on the likes of Facebook and Twitter to be more responsible for what's out there. Granted, people have free speech and they can say what they want, but if they're organized in such a way that they're spreading misinformation and encouraging people to go out there, and you have a constitutional right to this and a constitutional right to that, there's a danger there to the public health. It's funny when we mention misinformation, sometimes it can work both ways and we can all be accused of misinformation. I had a post up on my Facebook just showing the figures from 2018 and 2019 for new social housing being built in South Dublin County Council. It's around 450 units in 2018 and 2019. And the comments I got back from people were saying, that's fake, that's false, that's misinformation. Granted, partly, I'm sure, because of my political party, Fine Gael, people may not be believing that the houses are being built not enough and not quick enough. But I suppose that mantra that this is all fake, this is all misinformation, it can work both ways, which is difficult to resolve. And then once we do identify a site for housing, people from all communities and everywhere are against it in some cases because they don't want some green space being lost. They don't want extra traffic or people moving into the area. So that's something that every council has.
We're going to get into housing a good bit later on, and I suppose just to bring you in there, then Councillor Dunne, do you want to respond to that in some sort of way, or do you think what do you think about the verification as well?
Respond to David's comments. I've seen his paid sponsored posts, and I suppose I'll come back on that when we get into housing, because that to highlight, you know, inaccurate information, and we will speak about that, and I'll debate that with David as well. So if you just want to, because I'm kind of just gone on a tangent with that, so if you want to just kind of repeat the question to me again.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that maybe when people join social media that there should be some sort of verification process where people have to provide some form of ID? And do you even think that, I know that, like, as David mentioned, that is something that is being touted in terms of stopping abuse, and I know that came up with the James McLean stuff as well, and that was the main thing. But in terms of misinformation as well, because it is unverified sources where these things are coming from, do you think that would help curb the spread of that?
You know, I suppose it's difficult to answer, you know, when we have seen in the past what social media have done with people's personal information. Now, I know that you do have to kind of supply, you know, put in a certain amount of information, but I would have concerns about that around GDPR, etc. I don't personally know how we're going to tackle it. I think that it is something that needs to be tackled. You know, we have young people who are committing suicide due to being bullied online, you know, and we know as elected reps, you know, the amount of trolling that I suppose that we personally have to endure. Like I deleted my own Twitter account because I find Twitter just to be a cesspit of negativity and trolling. You know, for those I suppose that think that, I don't know, that they kind of know it all and are experts and everything, but you know, people are human, and there is people, you know, on social media behind these accounts that are human, and I think that, you know, as a society we have to be a lot more kinder, and we have to, I suppose, we have a responsibility as well to inform our constituents, you know, that these people who are spreading these far right conspiracy theories, that they have got their own personal agenda. Those who, you know, organised that protest on Saturday have their own personal agenda, and we see that right across, you know, the world. We see it in America, we see it in England. These are, you know, involved and have close links and ties with, you know, Britain Force and far right extremists who are totally against everything that this country stands for, you know, to repeal the 8th, you know, marriage equality, something that we went out in droves and vote in favour of, you know, and these far right groups are totally against everything that we stand for. So, you know, we have got a responsibility to, I suppose, be informing, you know, our constituents, you know, of who is behind these protests and who is behind these groups on social media.
Okay, just to bring you in now, Councillor Duff, why does this sort of misinformation captivate so many people? Why do you, like, what's your opinion on that?
I've a saying that goes back years: never let the facts interfere with a good story, because sometimes just it's there. You will notice that with social media, a lot of the stuff and a lot of the commentary that comes in the very early hours of the morning. You know, you just posts going up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. People are not functioning properly at that stage. They're looking at stuff. Sometimes I read pieces on Facebook or on Twitter, and I'd say, well, that's either a 2 wine bottle response or a 3 wine bottle response. It just depends. And I'm not being disparaging here, but it is fact that, I mean, you know that some of the most sensible people that get into the most trite arguments during the night are actually, they've obviously, you know, house measures rather than pub measures of a glass of wine or whatever. Look, I'm not being facetious on it. I just want to say that is part of it. The other part of it, I think, Hayden, if you take a look at what has happened in the last 4 years in America, you know, the hate that was spewing out in the election leading up to 2016, and from 2016 onwards, when the leader of the free world used Twitter and used social media as he could get rid of personal boil on it. And you look at what has happened: 70 odd million American people believe totally and completely that he was right. Probably about 60% of that 70 million genuinely believe that the election was stolen from him. And despite all the facts and the verifications, it doesn't matter. Because it's getting back. It's their way of upsetting the establishment. It is their way of getting back. You are giving us information through your journalism, through the Echo, but this is my way of getting back and saying, no, you don't know it all, because I'm at the reading on Facebook, or I'm at the reading on social media. This is right, and I want to do this, and I can contribute to this, but I can't contribute to an article in the Echo. I can't write that, and I can't go on RTE and broadcast. I mean, RTE is excoriated this year by an awful lot of people as being the harbinger of doom, and all they're doing is telling us about the public health briefings and all the like. But it does sound awful, but people are now getting to that stage, putting their fingers into, I don't want to know, I don't want to know, I don't want to know. So I think a lot of it comes that way. The conspiracies, the people who want to promote conspiracy, perfect vehicles for doing this, because you are getting to the vulnerable. You're getting the people who are listening, and the more you say it, and the more professional it looks, and the more the better it's presented. It comes up across all the different timelines. It ticks all the boxes across all the interests. They can link in. If you're having a discussion on childcare, you will find some way of somebody coming in and trolling the whole conversation. So there are professionals behind it, and it's following an agenda that worries me stiff. I don't know where we're going. I hate the thoughts of closing the Twitter account. I actually like Twitter, and I hate the thoughts of closing it, because we do disseminate some good information. We repeat it and pass it on. But it's getting to a stage where I said, nah, it's just not worth this. I'm going back to the old leaflets and that. Knock at the door. How you doing? You know, say it to me face.
Yeah.
Okay, right. We'll move on. So to I want to talk about drugs in particular. There was an article by Ali Bracken in the Sunday Independent recently, and Aidan O'Flaherty in the Echo followed up this week. She's been writing about the issues. Briefly, just to explain what is happening. According to community drug workers, this is in the piece that was released on Thursday, some women in West Tala who are struggling with crack cocaine addiction have become involved in sex work in order to pay off their drug debt. Just to start with yourself, Councillor Duff, because I know you obviously have an extensive background in working to tackle drugs in our communities for upwards of 25 years now with actually the Tala Drugs and Alcohol Task Force. Councillor Duff, this is such a complex issue. And I think that this story would have come as a shock to some people, just with the starkness of it. Where do you even start to tackle an issue like this?
I'm going to the basis behind all good stories, and unfortunately that particular story, as Councillor Dunne will agree with me on this, because Councillor Dunne worked in drug treatment as well, and was involved with drug treatment projects up in West Tala, and knows this. The reality is very, very stark. We have lived this reality for a long time. Yeah. We have lived with crack cocaine for the past 5 years, Hayden. It didn't happen on Friday before Ali Bracken took the story up on Saturday. The women who you said are sex workers, there's a lot of those women who, they're not voluntary sex workers, by the way. And somebody very facetiously said to me, well, you know, sex work is real work. That's fine if it's a choice. It's not a choice. Not when somebody's knocking at your door, as the story was put, they knock at your door and you can't pay your debt, and the debt has to be repaid by a favour that has to be done to give a service to somebody else against their will. And I think that part was appalling. But getting back and keeping on track, we have been involved for the past. We've known for that crack cocaine was at epidemic portions in Tala and other areas. It's not just Tala; it's across Tala for the past 5 years. We dreaded it coming. We knew it was coming. We dreaded the thoughts of that. We also dread what is yet to come to us. But crack cocaine is a reality that's here with us now. It's interfering with lives. It's upsetting communities. It's turning communities on their heads, because you now have, once again, your grandparents looking after children, taking care of children. The bottom line situation, Hayden, on this is resources. We being the community projects, the task force, and everybody else have been sitting on a level of funding for years, unchanged and untouched. And every time something new comes up, it's the frontline workers in the community drug projects that have to carry the can. The HSE has an opiate-based response program, the methadone protocol, and it has been in place for over 20 years. They probably didn't think it would last that long, but here it is. It's still with us and working. And I genuinely do believe it. I advocate for it, and I think it works well. I'm just coming to the point that that's the strategy. If you have a problem with crack cocaine or any other drugs, you end up going to your local community treatment program. Because if you present to the HSE, there's nothing there to help you. They can't advocate, they can't direct you towards a program. So you're asking stretched services, you're asking services that have very, very, very limited resources to react on a regional basis. Remember, Tallaght is larger than Limerick, you know, when you think about it. And yet we're resourced with one Garda station in Tallaght. That's just looking at the legal side where guards could intervene. Let's look at the other side of it where you have the treatment programs with 4 and 5 employees, and depending upon CE workers, depending upon TUS workers, depending upon volunteers to back up their services. And remember, these services have to be free of charge, because none of the community treatment programs are allowed to charge for these. But it's going to take a multi-agency approach. It's going to take it needs a community buy-in. Yes, certainly there's great things going to happen for Killinarden, and we'll be aware of that very, very shortly. We know there's a big investment going into the park and so on and so forth, but it's going to take a buy-in from everybody, Gardaí, HSE, Bernardo's, youth services, everybody across the broad spectrum, and cannot be left on the shoulders of the community alone.
Yeah. Just the level of deprivation in some of these areas, it's quite harrowing. And Councillor Dunne, I spoke to you a little over a month ago about this, about like even children, primary school age children, like getting lured into a life of criminality essentially by running drugs for dealers. Like what do you make of this? Like it's quite scary especially like when that story came out at the weekend. I was in shock reading it.
Well, Hayden, like Mick, I won't repeat what Mick said, you know, I won't echo what he said, but I totally agree. And, you know, I would support everything that he's saying there. But the fact of this is, you know, that this is ongoing years. It's going on, you know, since the 90s to 2000s. And women, you know, during the heroin epidemic, women were pushed into sex work then as well. Women are more vulnerable in addiction than men are vulnerable, but women would be more vulnerable than men, because more often than not, they are pushed into that line of work, and they are used by, you know, if you want, so-called pimps, or, you know, men who are also in addiction. I attended this morning an evaluation on the Try project. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of it, but what it is, it's a targeted response to youth project in Dublin 8 that covers Teresa's Gardens under the regenerational scheme there. And they have 3 outreach workers who work with the most hard to reach young people in the area. I don't want to take away from the fantastic work that youth services do in the area, but they can get into a comfort zone where they only work with, you know, the easy to reach young people. And a lot of our children and young people in Tallaght and in some of the most deprived areas within the county are being completely left behind. They are being groomed by drug dealers. I personally know and have reported young children who are being groomed by drug dealers within the Tallaght area. And like that is like it destroys my soul and breaks my heart to see so many young people going down that road. But it isn't something new. It's something that's gone back since the 90s, and there has been absolutely no political will to actually deal with what is going on, you know. And you mentioned it there, you know, about deprivation. You know, what this stems from is the structural inequalities that exist within our society. We have young children who are aspiring to become drug dealers because they only see that as the only opportunities they have. And we know, everyone knows that, you know, if you give a young person an opportunity, you know, they create brighter futures for themselves. But what we're saying to the young people in our community is, you know what, you're not good enough, you know, because of your socioeconomic background or where you're from or your address, that you're just not good enough. And it's not good enough that we as a society are allowing this to happen in our communities. Like, there's someone's children, like I have my boys here 14 and 15, and if I thought for 1 second that was happening to them, I don't know, I think I wouldn't be responsible. But there's something really wrong. There's something wrong, and what I know myself, if something's broke, I try and fix it, and if I can't fix it, I bin it and then I start again. And this is not it's not happening here. It's just not happening. We're not doing enough in this country to deal with this issue around drugs and what's happening to our young people. And we need to be shouting this from the rooftops, and we are doing that. Some of us are doing that. But we need the resources, we need the financial support in order to do that. The community projects, like Mick says, needs the financial support and the resources to do that. I got some figures this morning from that evaluation that I attended. So to keep a young person in Overstown, okay, it costs 385,000 a year. A year it costs, okay? And 75 grand a year to keep an adult in Mountjoy prison. Can you imagine the work that we would be able to do in our communities to give people the better opportunities, the opportunities that they rightly deserve to create a better future for themselves and to participate and engage in society? We would, the value of that, the monetary value in that, but there's no forward thinking. There never has been. A government thinks in a 4 or 5 year term of government, and they don't think down the line. And who's suffering? It's the children and the young people who are getting involved in drugs in our area. So, what do you do with that?
Yeah. Okay. Right. So just to bring you in then, Councillor McManus, I know what we're talking about here is more Tallaght-centric, and you're obviously Rathfarnham, Temple Ogue, but as the Deputy Mayor of South Dublin, I suppose, and you're obviously a member of Fine Gael as well, and this is something that hasn't, as Councillor Duff and Councillor Dunne have mentioned, this is something that's been going on for years. We've seen this with Concerned Parents Against Drugs and all coming out even in the 80s and 90s and trying to combat the heroin epidemic at the time, and it's still here today with crack cocaine. What's your take on this, and why hasn't this issue been dealt with?
The story in the Echo is obviously heartbreaking to see what people are going through. I can't disagree or argue what Councillor Duff or Louise Dunne has said. They put it very, very well. Funding for treatment has increased a bit in the last couple of years. I'm not going to say it's enough. It certainly isn't. And from what Mick is saying, obviously the services aren't seeing it at the ground where it's needed, which is concerning. When I saw the piece in the Echo, it reminded me of a piece of research that was done last year, the Health Research Board, and they had all the stats and figures. I think cocaine use is on the increase, which is very, very concerning. If I can be frank about it, I would take grave issue with people saying, good jobs, earn a good salary, using cocaine as a recreational drug at weekends, and not seeing any issue with it, not realising the cycle of violence and destruction across our society that they're supporting. Myself and my peer group, my friends, it's not something that we would ever engage with. No one in our social circle would be involved in that kind of thing. The research from the Health Research Board, I think there was over 10,500 cases treated for problem drug use in 2019. 2,500 of those were for cocaine, and of them 80% were male. So I think, as Mick Duff was saying, there's a whole approach needed here around education, awareness. Prevention is far better than the cure. But unfortunately, from what we're hearing, there are a lot of people out there who need our help and our assistance. I know people who have become addicted to gambling, addicted to alcohol. It's an impact on them as an individual, on their family. Speaking to people who've been down that road, family members and stuff, they've said to me, for all the help we can offer, the person themselves need to try and recognise the problem they have and try and seek help, because it is heartbreaking. And look, certainly we need to try and do a lot more across the community. Okay.
We'll move on to housing, and the main thing that I want to focus on with this, the aspect of our conversation, would be around the county development plan for 2022 to 2028, which is due out obviously later this year. Among the proposals in response, this is actually a piece from the Echo this week. It talks about how among the proposals in response to issues, in response to the issues paper relating to that development plan, are from the owners of City West Hotel, Cape Wraith, who are seeking to rezone their golf course for housing and provide social infrastructure, amenities and facilities. This is also happening as well, actually, along the Belgard Road there at the site owned by Hibernia REIT. and they're calling that site Newlands Farm. They're looking to rezone this land from agriculture use to residential for 3,500 residential units, which will be a mix of housing and apartments. They have stated that will be mixed tenure with social homes to rent and buy. Councillor Dunne, over 100 Kingswood residents came out to protest against the rezoning of the land. And one of the main concerns was that they wanted affordable housing, not build to rent. Like, what's your opinion on the rezoning policy for the county?
Okay, right. I
There's
don't
a lot
think
there.
yeah. Listen, okay, right. First off, okay, I just want to kind of give you some. I watched sorry, I'm about to lose my train of thought there. Anyway, right. I watched a podcast the other day with Dr. Catherine Lynch on it, and she referred to the wealth inequality in this country, okay? And she referred to a CSO and Revenue Commissioner's report from 2018 that stated that 10% of the population, 10% owns 82% of land in this country. Now that's farmland, housing and development, okay? What we have seen is, the last 10 years with Fine Gael, I know David is only a new councillor, so, but I'm not to personalise this, but he is a member of that party, who are intent on giving over the last of our, I suppose, our assets, this country's assets, right, to developers. There is absolutely going to be no land left in this country that is state-owned. The government is putting profit before people all the time. We see it with these STZs. We've seen it with the STZ up in City West, where developers are constantly contravening the Fortinstown local area plan up there. Elected reps, all of tele-councillors on the area committee oppose most of these developments because they are being developed without the proper infrastructure and facilities that were supposed to be phased along with this. So am I going to support the rezoning of the agricultural land? I haven't made a decision as yet. As thinking about it right now, I would be totally against it because I will have to make a informed decision. I will have to listen to residents that live in and around the area. We have been receiving countless emails. Mick will be able to support me in this. I'm trying to scan through all the emails that are coming in. So many during the day that I'm losing out on other emails. But yeah, I am also aware of the group looking to rezone the golf course up there, and I also have huge concerns about that as well, because City West, how much more I'm all for housing. But just one point as well, I went on just before this podcast to have a look and see how much a one-bed property would be to rent up in the City West area, and the cheapest that I found was $1,650 for a one-bed. Like, who are they building these properties for? Because there's very little within our county that can afford that, unless you are on a really good wage. It's out of reach for those that are on our allocations list, even for those that are on the homeless HAP. I think for one person you can get up to 900, and then there's discretion use. So who are these apartments being built for? Who are these properties being built for? There's a report as well. I think there was an article the other day, around the Docklands, 50% of the properties out there are empty. So, the government are supporting all these proposals and all these STZs, but who's going to live in them?
Yeah, okay. I know obviously, like, the chief executive is bringing out a report in May that will assess obviously all the population growth and the housing needs, and basically all of his assessments, and you make your decisions based on that. But Councillor McManus, if you were deciding, I suppose, like in terms of the rezoning of those two specific sites, like what are you thinking?
I suppose, as Councillor Dunne said, we haven't got to the point yet of making a final decision. I think every party will give different groups, resident associations, developers, try and give them a fair hearing. There has to be a balance between local infrastructure, green space, local educational facilities, schools, and then all the housing we need. Equally though, like all councillors, look, I was on the doors in 2019, going around knocking doors. I got abuse, and that's understandable because of the party I'm with, for not building enough housing. Now though, it seems to have gone the other way, whereby any development, whether it's a council development or whether it's a developer's development, people don't want housing anywhere near them, and they'll say, oh, the traffic will be terrible, I don't want to lose any green space. And this can impact all parties, because we can say one thing about a developer going for a high-rise 15-storey tower that no one wants on the doorstep. I understand that. But as councillors, we have to try and support housing when the council management are looking for the level of support. And unfortunately for me, just recently on South Dublin County Council, we had Sinn Féin going against 100% public housing on public land in Clondalkin. Now, I understand that at a local level, all councillors and TDs get contacted, be it a pure public housing development or whether it's a sky-high developers development. But we need housing, and that means sometimes at a local level, we have to say to our own local residents, we're in a housing crisis. We see the scenes on RT, Primetime Investigates, people on the street, homelessness that's going on. We have to build public housing. But in this case, Sinn Féin were very happy to delay public housing, and then we had Ona Brin on the radio trying to defend himself, who's their housing spokesperson. So I just take the view that if we all acknowledge there's a housing crisis, we have to try and show the public and take the backlash when it comes, that we have to support the construction of housing. There's 500 homes now in Kilnarden that have been approved on a council development. Sinn Féin, Social Democrats, People for Profit, they voted against that. So if we're waiting for this perfect housing model to come along, we could be waiting a very, very long time. So I understand the anxiety that's there. To be very, very upfront, if a developer can squeeze in 1,000 apartments, they will try and squeeze that in. They will maximise every bit of space on that development for profit. And that's where you have on board Clonala and some powers given to us as councillors to try and manage that, to make sure that when developments are being built, it's not just for profit at the developer for what they want. It's to try and take into account the need for recreational space, community facilities, everything else.
Yeah. I'm eager to bring yourself in, Councillor Duff, but I will just give Councillor Dunne an opportunity to respond.
I think that's fair.
I know, obviously, Councillor McManus, you were mentioning specifically about that war of words that was exchanged in relation to the social housing at Lindisfarne and Melrose, wasn't it, in Clondalkin?
Lindisfarne, yeah.
You can respond there if you want there, Councillor Dunne.
Okay, yeah, so I will start off with Lindisfarne, okay? We weren't trying to delay or oppose any housing in the area. What had happened was my colleagues over in Midwest, over in Clondalkin, who had consulted with the residents over there, and the residents weren't opposed to the housing. They wanted some amendments made to that party. So what we done was we put forward amendments to that party, and which would have seen some of the houses moved just across the road, and would have increased in the number of houses that was built. That wasn't supported by Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil or the Greens, so the community wasn't listened to. But in the end, we support. We didn't vote against this, so that is inaccurate. And it goes back to what I said about when we started off around the conversation about misinformation. We as politicians, there's an onus on us and a responsibility to be informing our constituents of correct and accurate information. In relation to Kilnarden, that we had two main pieces of land left that was owned by the council, and one of those was in Kilnarden. It was fully council owned, fully state owned, taxpayer owns that piece of land. We wanted to see 100% social and affordable housing built on that piece of land. Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Greens, what they done was they voted to sell off that piece of land to a private developer to then build private properties on it, the social and affordable. So again, a private developer is going to be profiting off one of our last pieces of land. In relation to the post that Councillor McManus paid, because look, we we both know, and if David's done as well, as you know, he's looking for one way into the doll, you know, so he's looking to promote himself. But you know, you need to promote yourself, and you know, build a trust, and you know, have a bit of integrity, and you know, and be honest with your constituents. In relation to the 4,500 houses that David said that Fine Gael built, because I have the post here, I can read it out to you. He says Fine Gael builds houses. So in relation to those 4,500 houses that he's referring to, a majority of those houses that are going to be built through the Clonburris SDZs. That his colleagues, he wasn't a councillor at the time, his colleagues, along with some independents, actively engaged with community groups to try and ensure that there was only 10% of social housing built in that SDZ. Now, with that being said, the council owned 22% of that land, okay? We had a real opportunity to build 4,000 social houses in that SDZ. And they fought tooth and nail. They actively, as I said, actively engaged with community groups. We went through 25 hours, I think it was 25 hours, Mick, that we went through of meetings for that Clonburris SDZ, and the stigmatisation and discrimination, you know, around people in social housing, it was absolutely appalling and disgusting, because as an elected rep, I represent everyone, regardless of their class, regardless of their economic status, regardless if they can afford to buy a private home, can afford to rent, or who are on our social housing list. And that's where the majority of those houses are going to be. They have been voted on and supported by myself and Mick, our parties, who were part of the alliance at the time. So it's completely inaccurate what David has just said there in relation to that. So I think I have covered and have responded to everything that David has said there.
Okay, I'm going to bring you back in at the end, Councillor McManus, to respond to a few of those things, but I want to get to Councillor Duff first. There's a lot there to unpack.
There's a lot there, Hayden. We could go back to the very first topic about false information and factual verification, but I leave that. I think my two colleagues here are debating that element of it very, very well. I do want to turn around and say yes. The majority of those houses that are going to be built, as Louise has alluded to, will be in the Clonburris SDZ. Yeah, there were a very long 25 hours of debate. I would say there were times it wasn't my finest moments in that, because the commentary, it got to skin and hair at times, and it really was. It was but the outcome was good. We didn't get the 4,000 social houses. We got 2.5. We got 2,600 and odd, near enough 2,700 over, which, by God, we fought tooth and nail, I think, for every single one of them. But we got them, and that's the main thing. Now, getting back to the question at hand, Hayden, about the rezoning, and I will look at, I suppose, the one in Tala Central, which is Kingswood, the Hibernia Rate lands, the former IRFU lands that were always agriculture. As long as I've been in Tala, there's been a farmer in the fields there, and it was known as the Farmer's Field. It's the home of Catherine Toynan's birdhouse, our family home. The derelict site, unfortunately, is still there. We've all tried our best to get that taken in and used, re-renovated as a heritage piece. But anyway, that's besides the point. Hibernia came forward, having bought the lands from the IRFU when they abandoned their plans for the stadium with the FAI, and opted for the Aviva, and the lands were then sold. Hibernia purchased them, and Hibernia are quite and Rate are obviously an international company. They have the money, they have the support to sit on sites like this for as long as it's possible. They made a wonderful presentation, and it's on the public record, because we're officially on the lobby record, and both myself and two other councillors that I personally met with them and received this wonderful plan for them wanting to develop that site, and indeed to develop parts of Ballymount Park. And they were proposing to build 7.5 7,000 units. That was the initial proposal. Big green, lovely big green book. And in there, we were going to have community facilities. We were getting an extra Louise station in there. Now, we were going to build 7,000 units. We were going to bring another, well, you would reasonably say 14,000 people into the public transport system. There wouldn't be carriages long enough on any tram to cater for that. But that's besides the point. The Hearts and Minds campaign has been going on in recent times, where they are offering a sports hub to the football clubs, Gaelic clubs and others in the Kingswood area. The ironic part about this is that this land will be isolated from Kingswood to the extent that there will be no entrance into the Kingswood area. Be no transport entrance in, because the Ballymount Road, there is no plan to open up the Ballymount Road into Kingswood. So it will become, if it ever happens, the Newlands Farm estate. It won't have any connection with Kingswood whatsoever. So this dangling of all these, wonderful goodies that we're going to we'll build all this for you. It's pie in the sky. It's beware the strangers bearing gifts, as far as I'm concerned. However, that land has always been the Greenbelt. That is the last piece of the lungs of Tallaght, between Tallaght and Clondalkin. The last piece of that. And I certainly am on record, and I will stand on record to say I will oppose rezoning of that. I am with Louise there. She knows full well and our background and our record and our track record on housing. If there are 3,500 houses built on that site, Hayden, or 3,500 units under Part 5, South Dublin County Council will get 350 under the current 10%. That's what we would get out of that, and that's the facts. Which would be great. We'd say, yeah, that's wonderful. That'd be terrific. But when you couple that, go across the road, not a million miles away, just a couple of 100 yards, couple of 100 meters up the road, in the Tallaght LAP, we have the Belgard Road and Belgard Square. We've 841 units being built. We have 2nd Avenue, Cookstown Industrial Estate, 196. These are all approved now. These are all SHDs. The fast-tracked plannings, 196 units. Ayrton Road, Belgard Road, 328 units fast-tracked. And Ayrton Road, Greenhouse Road, 502 units fast-tracked and ready. That's planning permissions granted, and we will get 10% of that, near enough 200, if you wish, out of those units that are coming there. So that's 2,000 units in the same immediate area. And that's only the beginning of it, because the SHCs are not done away with yet. It is only the beginning of it. We are regenerating Cookstown. So is there more applications coming down the line? Of course there are. So it has to be somewhere where we say, let's take a breath. Let's stop. Let's see now what the hell we can do. Can we keep some element of Tallaght green? Okay, there will be areas, people listening to this podcast maybe later on say, you didn't defend my green, and you didn't. Okay, so we didn't. But this is for the greater good of Tallaght. This is not taken away. We have never taken away an entire green. We've taken portions of a green space. But this is taking up an entire green area, an entire green belt, and I will not be supporting that. City West, somewhat similar. Again, over 2,000 units already approved up there. Again, in total, between City West and Belgard, if you wish, there, 405 social units would come out of Part 5. That's already planned and already there. When Mansfield owned City West, I'm going back to the time I came onto the council when I was mayor, he was looking to rezone and rechange everything. The golf courses were just an impediment. They were lovely when they were built, but he had the executive golf course on the other side, and that's gone now because that went into apartments as well. Saggart is now merged with City West, and bit by bit, we're bringing in the areas closer and closer and closer. British, Saggart, Rathcoole, they're all intermingled now. And it has to be a cry of, we need a little bit more breathing space here. So my jury is out definitely on City West by all means. I have great affinity with the people up there of the promises that were given and nothing delivered. And I'm damned if I'm going to see the same thing happening down here in Tallaght Central, down at this end. So no, I'll go on the record and say I won't be supporting the rezoning, but I'll listen. I definitely will listen, and it's going to take an awful lot to get me to change my mind.
Yeah. I know obviously you're saying there's a lot of developments already going on in the area, and urban sprawl is a massive issue. But at the same time, just to bring you in, Councillor McManus, obviously you want to build as much housing as possible, right?
Every politician, Hayden, will say they're pro-housing, but we're trying to get the right balance, as I've said. I think if we're being upfront about it, across all of Dublin, all parts, population is growing. That's a good thing. That's a positive. We need more housing for people. My party, Fine Gael, for the first couple of years in government, there was a bit of an economic mess to sort out. The Rebuilding Ireland scheme was launched in 2016, and effectively the councils were starting from zero to start building again. And it won't just be the councils building, we're going to have the private sector building as well. The figures I put up on social media, on my Facebook, people took a bit of a snipe at me about it, saying it was misinformation and fake news and all that. The figures for 2018 in the South Dublin County Council area was that there was 475 new social housing homes built. And in 2019, it was 449. Now, these are new builds. Now, they're not just built by South Dublin County Council, they're built by approved housing bodies and Part 5 agreements between the council and a developer. But they are new build social housing units. It's not enough. We have to do a lot more. The 4,500 I referenced, that's 4,500 in the South Dublin County Council area by the council, based on the national house building scheme called Rebuilding Ireland. And it is funny that in one of the papers last week, I saw the Fianna Fáil housing minister showing up to cut a ribbon on a new housing development in the inner city. And for a new housing development to be complete today, it means it started 3 years ago. And it actually started by Owen Murphy and Damien English, two Fine Gael ministers in the Department of Housing. They started the scheme, but they didn't get any photo or any, praise for getting it done or anything. It's a Fianna Fáil housing minister, but look, that's politics. We have to accept that. I just think across all of Dublin, wherever we identify a site, be it a site by a developer or by a site by the council, local people will naturally enough complain and give out and say, we don't want to lose this, we don't want to lose that. What's your objection to traffic? I'm 28 years of age. I'm saving for a mortgage. If we keep saying no to everything in Dublin, people like me will have to move down to Carlow or Kildare or Portlaoise or somewhere. So I think we need to try and get the right sort of balance. We have to try and find ways to say yes to housing developments. Just to respond to what Louise said about the Glendalkin site, like Louise mentioned that they wanted to include a site across the road to try and keep the locals happy. We can't add in a site to a planning application without delaying everything by 6 months. So it's not something that I would do as a councillor, to say to council management, let's include another site, delay everything by 6 months. In that case, I would either vote against it and stick with the local people and keep them happy, or just say to local people, look, we're in a housing crisis, we have to build housing. And this is 100% public housing on public land that was delayed. But look, it's happening now. If we can be constructive, to be upfront, Aidan, at the moment, construction sites are closed. So there's nothing being built at the moment, unfortunately. There's a couple of social housing units being finished off. I think all councillors, all politicians, all TDs can agree the key thing right now is to get construction sites back open so we can get something built, because the clock is ticking and every week we're losing valuable time to get houses built. But we are back building houses, and if I can say one thing, Fine Gael has got councils back building houses again for the first time in 20 years with Rebuilding Ireland that was launched in 2016. Nationally, there's been over 17,000 new build social housing units built by Fine Gael. And the numbers I gave you for South Dublin County Council, these are new builds. They're not being rented or leased with any vulture funds or any investors. These are built by the council, by approved housing bodies, and through Part 5 agreements. These are new build social housing built by Fine Gael.
By God, you're a
I know,
unmitigated self-publicist.
You're an awful spoofer, Dave.
Yeah, it's true as God. I mean, I don't know why you bother with sponsored Twitter. Jeepers, you can do a great job yourself.
I tell you, you'll fit in well in Leinster House, you will. I'm telling you.
We'll move on, so we'll leave that there. And just to leave it on, we'll leave it with this because I think this is quite a positive story. It's about biodiversity. We had it's a very good news story. It has a possibility of being one anyway. In 2019, the Tallaght Wetlands, which was teeming with all these different animals and fauna, was destroyed after South Dublin County Council dumped 4 feet of rubbish-filled silt on top of it. And it was devastating at the time, and there was a lot of reporting around it. It hit the nationals, and I suppose the good news in this story is the council have made an effort to restore this land, and I spoke to local conservationist Colin Ennis this past week, and he's discovered between 40 and 50 breeding adult common frogs at this site, all spawning as well. Councillor Duff, to quote Dr. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park, life finds a way.
Like it does. Hayden, it was amazing because when it happened, and I know my colleagues will agree with this, that when it actually happened, the world looked so black that through an act of thoughtlessness, it was no more than that. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't an action that somebody in the council made a decision. Let's spread the tons of silt that we've removed from the lakes on over these wetlands to destroy the wetlands. And fair play to, you mentioned Colin Ennis there. I think Colin Ennis has contributed to all of our education on biodiversity over that period of time and leading up to now. He certainly has heightened my awareness of it. I thought the world, I thought it was catastrophic. I thought it was like a nuclear option, that I think I said to you before, Hayden. But nature does find a way, as it's finding it in Chernobyl. But here we are in Tala. Thank God that nature is finding a way. The wetlands are recovering when we didn't think that they would. And they are, which is great. And I'm delighted to see that. And I'm also delighted to see the inclusion now of additional wetlands in the Tala area, particularly Dodder Valley Park and Kilnamana, which are two that we did. There was three in total, and Louise, you'll have to tell me where the third one is. But I know that we passed them, and I'm very, very pleased to have been involved closely with the Kilnamana negotiations. And I know Dodder Valley Park is great. But getting back to the point, every effort was there was no effort spared. I mean, every effort was made to make sure that these things that would recover. As I said, what happened, they drained, they carried out the drainage, the silt has to be removed from the lakes in Sean Walsh Park. That happened. It was stored, it was put into these mounds, and they put them up beside the wetlands. Nobody can tell us for sure and certain who gave the nod, but a dozer come out and spread it all across the area without realising what was happening. And I think initially South Dublin County Council's response to it was nearly to hide their shame and embarrassment and not give public statements. It took Colin Ennis to break the news. There was many's a debate, both at Council, at Tala Area Committee, and indeed on the full council. And we had to push to get the council initially to come out and give a statement and clarify it, because as local councillors, we were the ones that were getting the first calls, and you felt like a vandal and being part of organised vandalism. But thankfully, they did put matters right, and I'm very pleased to see recovery happening, and long may it continue to recover.
Brilliant. Something to note as well, Collie said to me that he believes this is only the start, and the area does need further protection just to ensure that the wetlands can once again thrive and return to its former glory. Councillor Dunne, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, I just echo what Mick said as well. And I have to commend Collie, for highlighting this and the national media, because I didn't personally have any idea about it. I think that we should be protecting our biodiversity. Like, I remember as a kid, I lived in Clondalkin, and we were surrounded by fields would be very similar to Tala. And one of the fields that we used to go and play on as kids is where Liffey Valley is now built now. We won't go into the rezoning of that either. But, and we went and we were catching tadpoles, and now we've seen frogs, and, the development even, as a young child, being out with nature, and we've technically destroyed that, Someone said to me there, during the first lockdown, when we start hearing about COVID, it's humans who are the virus. We are destroying our biodiversity. We are destroying nature, everything that surrounds us. And yes, we need to build houses. Of course we do. We need homes for people, but we need to protect our biodiversity. And we have got lands, across the county where there is proposals to build on them as well, that are very contentious, and understandably so. But yeah, you know, the council, as Mick said, you know, at the start they were kind of like, I think they were hiding in shame. But, you know, it is great to see now that they are protecting it, and long may it, you know, last, and long may our children be able to go down there. And because, as I said, I don't think I've said it, or if I said it, I don't think my boys have ever seen a frog, you know, so to be able to bring them down there and see, show them what a frog looks like, you know. But so yeah, again, just to kind of commend Collie as well. Like he's been fantastic. Yeah.
And just lastly, Councillor McManus, I'll leave the final word with yourself. This was an area that was really a thriving ecosystem with bats, bugs, newts, frogs, foxes, badgers. Even Collie actually said to me that he spotted a pine marten there as well before the disaster happened. And I know there's obviously so many. They're like the council are implementing these integrated constructed wetlands across the county again now, and to encourage that sort of wildlife to come into our areas again. This is a good news story.
It's positive. It was obviously deeply upsetting what happened to the wetlands at Sean Walsh Park. We need to try and make sure nothing of that can never happen again. Like from a climate change point of view, like we are planting something like 2,000 new trees every year. And it's funny because the councillors here will know that I'm always looking to try and get trees pruned and all that kind of thing. But one of the council managers just said to me, like, you know, we get requests from all across South Dublin County Council for trees to be managed and trees to be pruned and everything. If the council management were to run out with a chainsaw every time someone rings them to take a branch off a tree, half the trees would be taken out entirely, you know. So we need to try and find a reasonable balance to make sure that these things are taken into account. Thankfully, there is greater awareness now. And just this morning, I was out walking my greyhound, and a neighbour said to me, "Can you try and get the local green area, get the grass cut again more regularly?" But all these things have a knock-on effect. So there is a greater understanding and awareness now from a biodiversity point of view, that we can have all the green spaces we want cut for recreation and playing football and everything. But we also need to consider the plants and the flowers and, you know, all that kind of thing to make sure we're looking after wildlife. And then again, as I think Louise Dunne said, there's going to be a very contentious issue coming up with the woodlands in Rathcoole. There's trees there that people don't want removed. Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, when I was out knocking doors and people said to me, we need to build houses, I thought it was a very straightforward thing that when we get in there, we build houses. It's fairly straightforward. I didn't think it would be such a contentious, divisive issue that in some cases we have to consider if we're going to build houses on a site, it means taking out a lot of woodland trees, which is not ideal either.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'd just like to say, Councillor Louise Dunne, Councillor Mick Duff and Councillor David McManus, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much, Aidan. Very enjoyable. Thank you, and enjoy the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Local Voices. If you haven't already, be sure to follow the show on your streaming platform of choice, or subscribe to the Echo newspaper on YouTube. Or if you listen through echo.ie, bookmark the page and check back each week for the latest release.